The rope wasn't for hanging that day. It was for tethering a human soul. In the scorching heat of July 1884, outside the jagged timber frame of the Dust Creek Saloon, the unthinkable was happening. A mother stripped of her dignity and her infant son were standing on an auction block, sold to the highest bidder to pay a dead man's gambling debts. The town watched in silence. The gavel was about to fall on a life of misery when a single gunshot cracked the air, not to kill, but to silence the room. A stranger on a black stallion had arrived, and he wasn't there to watch. He was there to collect. The Arizona sun did not forgive, and it certainly did not pity. It beat down on the neck of Eliza Brooks, burning the skin beneath the thin frayed collar of her cotton dress. She stood on the raised wooden platform that usually served as the loading dock for the dry goods store, but today it was a stage for her humiliation. In her arms, 6-month-old Leo squirmed, his small face red and wet with sweat. Eliza rocked him gently, humming a tune that had no sound, her throat too parched to produce a melody. She kept her eyes fixed on the dusty tips of her boots. To look up was to see them the men of Dust Creek. They were a sea of weathered hats, tobacco-stained beards, and hungry, predatory eyes. "Order, I will have order," bellowed Mayor Barnaby Rook. Rook was a man who looked like he was made of bread dough left out in the sun too long, soft expanding and beginning to sour. He stood next to Eliza, sweating profusely in a suit that cost more than Eliza's late husband had made in his entire life. He held a piece of paper in one hand and a heavy oak gavel in the other. "We are here to settle the outstanding accounts of the deceased Thomas Brooks," Rook announced, his voice booming over the gathered crowd. "As per the territorial laws regarding debt and indentured restitution, and seeing as the widow possesses no currency, land, or livestock of value, her labor and guardianship are hereby placed on the market." A murmur went through the crowd. It was a polite way of saying slavery dressed up in legal jargon. Thomas Brooks had been a fool and a drunkard, a man who chased gold he couldn't find, and bet money he didn't have. He had died 3 weeks ago in a collapsed mine shaft, leaving Eliza with nothing but a mountain of debt owed to Mayor Rook himself. "Do I hear an opening bid for the domestic services of Mrs. Brooks?" "Term of 5 years," Rook shouted, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "She cooks, she cleans, and she is young enough to handle the rougher chores." $10, shouted a voice from the back. It was Silas Vane, the local pig farmer. The man smelled of manure even from 20 yards away. Eliza shuddered, pulling Leo closer to her chest. $10 is an insult, Vane." Rook scoffed, though he smiled greedily. "The debt stands at 400. I need serious men here." 20, called out the saloon keeper, a man known for how often he bruised the girls who worked his upstairs rooms. Eliza felt a tear cut a clean line through the dust on her cheek. This was her reality. She was 22 years old. She had come west from Ohio with dreams of a homestead and a garden. Now she was livestock. The law in this part of the territory was thin, and Mayor Rook owned the sheriff, the judge, and the bank. There was no one to plead to. $50. The voice was raspy and came from the front. It was Old Man Miller, a widower who owned a sprawling rocky ranch 10 miles east. He was known for working his mules until they dropped dead and then beating them for dying. He stared at Eliza with a look that made her skin crawl. $50 going once, Rook shouted, raising the gavel. "A fine, strong woman. And the boy. Well, he'll be a hand in a few years. 2 for the price of 1. The crowd laughed. The sound was sharp and cruel. Eliza closed her eyes. "God," she prayed, "if you are out there, let the ground swallow me. Don't let Miller take my boy." $50 going twice. Rook's eyes scanned the crowd looking for a higher number, but the town was poor, and $50 was a fortune to most. Eliza tightened her grip on Leo. She would run. As soon as Miller took her to his wagon, she would bite, scratch, and run into the desert. She would rather the coyotes take them than that man. Sold to... Rook began to bring the gavel down. Crack. The sound wasn't the gavel hitting the wood. It was the deafening report of a Colt peacemaker. The bullet splintered the wood of the auction block inches from Mayor Rook's expensive leather boot. Rook shrieked, jumping back and dropping the gavel. The crowd gasped and scrambled, hands flying to their own holsters, turning toward the source of the shot. At the edge of the crowd, where the main road faded into the open desert, a horse stood. It was a massive black beast, its coat shimmering despite the dust, and atop it sat a shadow. The rider did not move. He sat easy in the saddle, one hand resting on the horn, the other holding a smoking revolver pointed at the sky. He was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered and clad in a duster coat that had seen 1,000 miles of bad weather. His hat was pulled low, casting a shadow over his eyes, but the lower half of his face was visible, a square jaw covered in rough stubble, and a thin white scar running from his ear down to his neck. "Disrupting a legal proceeding is a hanging offense," Mayor Rook squealed, trying to regain his composure while hiding behind the lectern. "Sheriff, arrest that man." Sheriff Grady, a pot-bellied man who preferred sleeping to fighting, stepped forward tentatively, his hand hovering over his gun. "Now look here, stranger. You put that iron away." The stranger holstered the gun, with a motion so fast it was almost a blur. He nudged his horse forward. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one wanted to be in the way of a man who rode like that. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic clop, clop, clop of the horse's hooves on the hard, packed earth. He stopped 10 feet from the auction block. He looked up. Eliza stopped breathing. Beneath the brim of his hat, she saw eyes the color of cold steel. They didn't look at the mayor. They didn't look at the sheriff. They looked straight at her. There was no lust in them, no pity. Just a cold, calculating assessment. "The auction is over," the stranger said. His voice was deep like gravel grinding under a wagon wheel. It wasn't a question. "You can't just ride in here and declare it over," Rook sputtered, emboldened by the presence of the sheriff. "This woman is being sold to satisfy a debt of $400. Mr. Miller here bid 50. The stranger turned his head slowly to look at Miller. The old rancher, who had been so eager a moment ago, suddenly found the ground very interesting. He took a step back. 400, the stranger repeated. "That's the debt," Rook said, puffing out his chest. "Plus interest and auction fees. Let's call it 500. The stranger reached into his saddlebag. He didn't pull out another gun. He pulled out a heavy canvas sack. He tossed it through the air. It landed on the wooden platform with a heavy metallic thud that shook the boards beneath Eliza's feet. Rook stared at the sack. He reached out with trembling hands and undid the strings. He gasped. Inside were gold coins, double eagles, freshly minted. "Count it," the stranger said. 500, and 50 for the inconvenience. The crowd began to whisper. That kind of money didn't exist in Dust Creek. That was railroad money, bank robbery money. "Who are you?" Rook asked, his greed warring with his fear. "I need a name for the bill of sale." "Gideon Holt," the stranger said. The name hit the crowd like a physical blow. Eliza saw the sheriff take a full step back. Even she had heard the name. Gideon Holt was a ghost story. A former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter, known for tracking men into the hellish lands of Mexico and dragging them back dead or alive. They said he had no heart, that he had cut it out himself to stop feeling the pain of the wounds he'd taken. "Mr. Holt," Rook stammered, suddenly very polite. "Well, the money is certainly good. But surely a man of your profession has no need for a washerwoman and a babe." "The bill of sale," Gideon said, his hand drifting back toward his hip. "Now." Rook scrambled for his pen. He scribbled furiously on the document, stamped it with the town seal, and held it out. Gideon didn't take the paper. "Give it to her." Rook blinked. To her, she owns herself now, Gideon said, but she rides with me. Rook handed the paper to Eliza. She took it, her fingers shaking so hard she almost dropped it. She looked at the paper, then at the man on the horse. She owns herself. It was a freedom she hadn't expected yet. The second part of his sentence terrified her. She rides with me. Get your things, Mrs. Brooks, Gideon said. We're burning daylight. I have nothing, Eliza whispered. Just a carpetbag behind the store. Get it. Eliza stepped down from the block. Her legs felt like jelly. She retrieved her battered bag. When she returned, Gideon kicked his boot out of the stirrup and offered a hand. It was a massive hand, calloused and scarred. She hesitated. Where are you taking us? West, Gideon said. To the basin. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why did you do this? Gideon looked down at her, and for a second, the steel in his eyes seemed to soften just a fraction. Or perhaps it was a trick of the light. Because, he said quietly, so only she could hear, I knew Thomas, and he owed me more than money. The ride out of Dust Creek was an exercise in torture. Gideon had mounted Eliza behind him on the great black stallion. The horse was strong enough to carry the double load without breaking stride, but the intimacy of it was terrifying. Eliza had to wrap one arm around Gideon's waist to keep from falling, clutching Leo with the other. His back was a wall of muscle, rigid and unyielding. He smelled of gun oil leather and the sagebrush of the high desert. He didn't speak. He didn't look back. He simply rode, guiding the horse off the main road and onto a narrow, rocky game trail that wound up into the mesas. For hours, the only sound was the wind whistling through the canyons. Eliza's mind raced. He knew Thomas. That could mean anything. Thomas had owed money to bad men. Was Gideon one of them? Had he bought her to exact some twisted revenge for a debt Thomas hadn't paid? But he had said, she owns herself. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood orange, Gideon finally pulled on the reins. They were in a small box canyon sheltered from the wind. A small spring trickled from the rocks, a rare oasis in the wasteland. We camp here, Gideon said. He dismounted smoothly, then reached up and took Leo from her arms. He held the baby awkwardly, like he was holding a stick of dynamite that might go off. Eliza slid down her legs, aching. She quickly took Leo back. I can handle him. Gideon nodded and turned away to gather wood. Within minutes, he had a fire crackling. He produced a tin of beans and some dried jerky from his saddlebags. He offered the best portion to Eliza. She sat on a flat rock near the fire, feeding Leo. Gideon sat opposite her, cleaning his rifle. The firelight danced on the scar on his face, making it look like a jagged lightning bolt. You said you knew my husband, Eliza said, breaking the silence. She needed to know. The fear was eating her alive. Gideon didn't look up from the rifle. He worked the cloth through the barrel with methodical precision. I did. Was he a friend of yours? Gideon paused. He looked up, his face hard. Thomas Brooks didn't have friends. He had accomplices, and he had victims. Eliza flinched. She knew Thomas wasn't a saint, but to hear it spoken so plainly hurt. He was my husband. He tried his best. He was a gambler and a thief, Mrs. Brooks, Gideon said flatly. And 6 months ago, in a saloon in Tombstone, he stole something from me. Something that couldn't be replaced with gold. And you came to kill him, Eliza whispered, pulling Leo tighter. I came to get back what was mine, Gideon said. I found out he was dead when I hit the county line. Then I heard about the auction. So you bought me? Why, to work off his debt to you? Gideon holstered the gun. He took off his hat, running a hand through dark, matted hair. I bought you because I looked at that crowd, Mrs. Brooks. I saw Miller. I saw the mayor. I knew what would happen to you and that boy if I didn't step in. I may be a lot of things, But I ain't a monster. But you said he stole something, Eliza pressed. What did he steal? Gideon stared into the fire. The silence stretched for a long time. A locket, he said finally. Silver, with a picture inside. It belonged to my sister. And you think I have it? Thomas wrote a letter before he died, sent it to a mutual acquaintance, said he hid his greatest treasures at his old homestead in the basin. He said he was saving them for a rainy day. Gideon looked at her. I reckon he meant the loot he stole. I'm going there to tear that shack apart until I find it. Since you have nowhere else to go, and since that shack is technically yours by right of marriage, I'm taking you home. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. The homestead in the basin was a ruin. Thomas had talked about it, a place he tried to farm 5 years ago before giving up. It was in the middle of Apache territory, miles from civilization. That place is dangerous, Eliza said. Thomas said the water was bad and the land was cursed. The land isn't cursed, Gideon said, lying back against his saddle and pulling his hat over his eyes. But it is dangerous. Sleep, Mrs. Brooks. We ride at dawn. And if you hear anything in the night, don't scream. Just wake me. Eliza didn't sleep. She watched the flames die down, watching the rise and fall of the chest of the man who had bought her life for $500. He was a killer, a bounty hunter, a man hunting a ghost's stolen treasure. But as the coyotes howled in the distance, she realized that for the first time in months no one was trying to hurt her. The man with the scar was a wall between her and the world. But she knew something Gideon didn't. She had gone through Thomas's pockets when they brought his body back from the mine. She had found a locket, a silver one. She had sold it to the undertaker just to pay for a pine box so Thomas wouldn't be buried in a pauper's grave. If Gideon found out she had sold the only thing he cared about, the wall might come crashing down on top of her. The second day of travel was harder than the first. The terrain shifted from open desert to rocky, treacherous foothills. The heat was a physical weight pressing down on Eliza's shoulders. Leo was fussy, crying from the dust and the motion of the horse. Gideon was patient, surprisingly so. When Leo cried, Gideon didn't shout or complain. He simply slowed the horse or offered his canteen. He needs shade, Gideon said around noon, spotting a cluster of mesquite trees near a dried-up wash. We rest here until the sun drops. They huddled in the shade. Eliza felt dizzy. She hadn't eaten much. She had given most of her portion of beans to the baby, mashing them up so he could swallow. You're starving, Gideon observed. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrapped block of pemmican dried meat and fat. Eat. I'm fine, Eliza lied. You pass out, you fall off the horse. You fall off, I have to carry you. Eat. She took it. It tasted like sawdust and grease, but it was the best thing she had ever eaten. Why the locket? Eliza asked, needing to fill the silence, needing to understand him. Was it valuable? Gideon was carving a piece of wood with a large Bowie knife. Not in money. My sister. She died 3 years ago. Cholera. That locket was the last thing I gave her. Thomas took it off her body when he robbed the coach she was on. He didn't kill her, the fever did that, but he robbed the dead. That takes a special kind of low. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas had robbed a stagecoach. He had told her he won the money at cards. He had lied about everything. And she had sold that locket to a crooked undertaker in Dust Creek for $12. I have to tell him, she thought. But if I tell him, he might leave us here to die. I didn't know, Eliza stammered. Ain't your fault, Gideon said. He stopped carving. His body went rigid. Don't move. What? Don't move. Eliza froze. Slowly she followed Gideon's gaze. Just 3 feet from where she sat with Leo, a diamond-back rattlesnake was coiled. Its head raised, its rattle buzzing like a dry leaf in a storm. It was ready to strike. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She clutched Leo, terrified that the baby would make a noise. Gideon didn't reach for his gun. The movement would be too fast. The noise would startle the snake into striking before the bullet hit. He needed to be faster than a gunshot. He held the bowie knife in his right hand. He didn't look at Eliza. He locked eyes with the snake. "Close your eyes, Sarah," he said, using a name she hadn't heard. He blinked, correcting himself. "Eliza. Close your eyes." She squeezed her eyes shut. Whish, thunk. A wet, slicing sound. The rattling stopped instantly. Eliza opened her eyes. The snake's head was pinned to the sand, severed cleanly from its body by the heavy knife. The body writhed aimlessly in the dust. Gideon leaned forward and retrieved his knife, wiping the blade on his boot. "Dinner," he said calmly. Eliza stared at him. He had moved faster than she could see. He had saved them without breaking a sweat. "You called me Sarah," Eliza whispered. Gideon stiffened. He stood up, turning his back to her, to skin the snake. "Mistake. Just a mistake." But Eliza saw the way his shoulders hunched, the tension in his neck. Sarah. Was that his sister, or someone else? Gideon Holt was a book written in a language she couldn't read, but she was starting to learn the alphabet. The basin was not a place for the living. It was a vast, sunken depression in the earth, ringed by jagged mountains that looked like the teeth of a dead animal. The vegetation here was sparse, twisted mesquite, thorny cholla, and dry, brittle grass that crumbled to dust under the horses' hooves. It took them 2 more days to reach the homestead. 2 days of blistering heat and freezing nights. 2 days of Gideon Holt watching the horizon with the paranoia of a man who knew he was being hunted, though he never said by whom. Eliza had learned to read his silence. A stiffening of his shoulders meant he heard a noise. A loosening of his grip on the reins meant the danger had passed. She found herself watching him not with fear anymore, but with a strange, aching curiosity. He was a man carved from the same hard rock as the landscape, yet he checked on Leo every hour. He gave her the last of the water. He was a protector, a role Thomas had never filled. "There," Gideon said, pointing a gloved finger toward a rise in the distance. At the foot of a sheer cliff face stood a shack. It was generous to call it a house. It was a slapdash collection of grey, weathered timber and corrugated tin, leaning precariously to the left. A collapsed barn sat nearby, its roof caved in like a broken rib cage. "That's it?" Eliza asked, her heart sinking. Thomas had described a ranch. He had described a kingdom. "That's it," Gideon grunted. "Bitter Creek, or what's left of it." They rode up to the structure. The silence was absolute. No birds sang here. The wind didn't even whistle. It just moaned. Gideon dismounted and drew his revolver. "Stay here." He approached the door, kicking it open, with a violence that made Eliza jump. He disappeared inside. A moment later, he emerged, holstering his gun. "Clear. Just rats and memories." Eliza climbed down her legs, stiff. She carried Leo into the shack. The air inside was stale, smelling of dry rot and old whiskey. A single table with 3 legs stood in the center, and a rusty iron stove sat in the corner. "Make a fire." Gideon commanded, his eyes already scanning the room, calculating. "I'm going to start searching." "Searching where?" Eliza asked, laying Leo on a pile of relatively clean blankets in the corner. "Everywhere." For the next 4 hours, Eliza watched a man possessed. Gideon didn't just search, he dismantled. He pried up loose floorboards with the edge of a crowbar he found in the barn. He tapped on the walls, listening for hollow sounds. He climbed into the rafters. He was looking for the loot. He was looking for the locket. Every time he pried up a board, Eliza's stomach twisted into a tighter knot. She knew he wouldn't find it. She knew the locket was sitting in a velvet tray in the dusty window of Mr. Abernathy's Undertaking and Curiosities back in Dust Creek. She should tell him. She had to tell him. But as she watched the sweat drip from his nose, as she saw the desperate intensity in his steel-grey eyes, the words died in her throat. He had saved her. He had paid $500 for her. If he knew she had sold his sister's memory for a cheap pine coffin, he might leave them here in this god-forsaken wasteland. "Damn it!" Gideon roared, throwing a piece of rotten wood across the room. It shattered against the stove. Eliza flinched. Leo woke up and started to wail. Gideon stopped. He stood in the center of the ruined room chest, heaving, covered in dust and cobwebs. He looked at the crying baby, then at Eliza. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. "It's not here," he said, his voice hollow. "He lied. Even in his death letter, the bastard lied." Maybe he buried it outside," Eliza suggested weakly, bouncing Leo to soothe him. "I checked the barn. I checked the well. It's gone." Gideon sank onto a crate, putting his head in his hands. 3 years. I've been tracking that silver locket for 3 years. It's the only picture I have of her. The only thing that proves she existed. Eliza's heart broke. She couldn't keep it anymore. The guilt was heavier than the heat. "Gideon," she said softly. He didn't look up. "We'll rest tonight. Tomorrow we head for Tucson. I'll put you on a train east. You're free." "Gideon, look at me." He slowly raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. "It's not here," she said, her voice trembling, "because Thomas didn't hide it." Gideon frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "What do you mean? He had it on him," Eliza whispered. "When he died in the mine, the coroner gave me his personal effects in a bag." Gideon stood up slowly. The air in the room changed. It became charged electric with tension. "You saw it. You saw the locket." "Yes." "Where is it, Eliza?" His voice was very quiet. Dangerous. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't know it was yours. I didn't know about your sister. Thomas left us with nothing. Rook was going to throw his body in the pauper's ditch. I couldn't let the father of my child be buried like trash." Gideon took a step toward her. "Where is it?" "I sold it," she sobbed, "to the undertaker in Dust Creek for $12. The silence that followed was louder than the gunshot at the auction. Gideon stared at her. His face went completely blank, devoid of all emotion. It was a look far more terrifying than his anger. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, as if she were nothing. $12, he repeated. "I needed to bury him," she pleaded, clutching Leo. "I didn't know." "You sold my sister's soul for a pine box for a thief," Gideon said. The words were cold, sharp daggers. He turned his back on her. He walked to the door. "Gideon, please. Don't speak to me," he said, not looking back. "Don't you say a word. You stay in here. You keep that door barred. If you come out, I might forget that I don't kill women." He walked out into the dark, slamming the broken door behind him. Eliza collapsed onto the floor, weeping into the baby's blanket, listening to the sound of Gideon's boots, crunching away into the darkness, leaving her alone in the ruin of her life. Gideon didn't sleep. He sat on a ridge overlooking the shack, a bottle of whiskey he'd found in his saddlebag, resting on his knee. He didn't open it. He just stared at the label, watching the moonlight reflect off the glass. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to ride away and leave her to the mercy of the desert. She had sold Sarah. Sarah, who had been the only light in his life, the only thing that kept him human after the war. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eliza's face. He saw the bruises on her soul. He saw a mother trying to protect her dignity and her child. She didn't know a voice in his head whispered, "She's just surviving, Gideon, just like you." He uncorked the bottle and took a long, burning pull. He wiped his mouth. "Damn you, Thomas Brooks," he muttered to the stars. "Even dead, you're ruining lives." He was about to take another drink when he heard it. It was faint, carried on the wind, the strike of a horseshoe on stone. Not a wild Mustang. Wild horses didn't wear iron. Gideon capped the bottle instantly. He lay flat on the ridge, sliding his Winchester rifle forward. He scanned the valley floor below. Shadows were moving. Not one or two. 6. 7 riders. They were approaching the shack from the east, using the dried creek bed for cover. They were moving tactically, quietly. These weren't Apaches. Apaches didn't ride heavy horses like that. These were jackals. Gideon squinted through the sights. The moonlight caught the silver conchos on the leader's hat. Gideon felt a chill go down his spine. He knew that hat. He knew the way that man rode. It was Dutch Kincaid, the man Thomas had ridden with before he went solo. The man Thomas had likely stolen the loot from. "They tracked us," Gideon whispered, "or they tracked Thomas's ghost." He looked down at the shack. Eliza was inside, unprotected. Kincaid was known for leaving no witnesses. He would burn the shack down just to see the sparks fly. Gideon's anger at Eliza evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard instinct of the ranger he used to be. He checked the load in his rifle. 14 rounds, 6 in the pistol on his hip. "Part 6, he muttered to himself. "Time to earn that $500. He didn't fire yet. He slid backward down the ridge, moving like a phantom, circling around to get behind the shack before the jackals closed the trap. Inside the shack, Eliza had finally stopped crying. She sat in the dark, the heavy bar across the door, Leo asleep in her lap. She felt hollowed out. She had lost Gideon's trust, and in doing so she had lost her only protection. Thump. A small rock hit the wooden shutter of the window. Eliza froze. Thump. Another one. "Eliza," came a whisper from the back wall. It was Gideon. She scrambled to the back wall, pressing her ear against a gap in the rotting wood. "Gideon, listen to me closely," he hissed. "Don't light a lamp. Don't make a sound. There are 7 men outside. They're surrounding the house." Eliza's blood ran cold. "Who?" "Old friends of Thomas. Bad men. They want the money he stole." But there is no money." "They won't believe that," Gideon said. "Take the baby. Get under the floorboards. I saw a loose hatch in the corner near the stove. Get in there and don't come out no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" "Where are you going?" she asked, panic rising. "I'm going to introduce myself," Gideon said grimly. "Now hide." Eliza grabbed Leo and crawled to the corner. She pried up the hatch Gideon had loosened earlier. It revealed a crawl space, dark and smelling of damp earth. She lowered herself, pulling the boards back over her head, just as a heavy boot kicked the front door. The door shattered inward. "Thomas, you rat-faced coward! Come out and greet your old captain!" The voice was booming, jovial and terrifying. Dutch Kincaid stepped into the shack, a lantern in one hand and a sawed-off shotgun in the other. 2 other men crowded in behind him, guns drawn. "Place is empty, boss," one of the men grunted. "He ain't here," Kincaid said, kicking the table over. "But someone is. Fire in the stove is still warm, and it smells like—" He sniffed the air. "Milk and lavender." Under the floorboards, Eliza clamped her hand over Leo's mouth, praying he wouldn't wake. Dust drifted down through the cracks, landing in her eyes. She could see the boots of the men, walking inches above her head. "Check the barn," Kincaid ordered, "and check the ridge. Someone's been here." "I'm right here, Dutch." The voice came from the open doorway. Kincaid spun around, raising the shotgun. Gideon stood in the doorframe, silhouetted by the moonlight. He held his Winchester at his hip, the barrel leveled at Kincaid's chest. "Well, I'll be damned." Kincaid grinned, revealing gold teeth. "Gideon Holt, the ranger turned dog catcher. I heard you were dead in Mexico." "I got better," Gideon deadpanned. "You're trespassing Dutch." "This is my property," Kincaid spat. Thomas stole 20,000 in railroad bonds from me. I'm here to collect." "Thomas is dead," Gideon said. "Died in a mine weeks ago. There's nothing here but dust." "Is that so?" Kincaid's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here? You don't ride for free, Holt. You found it, didn't you?" "I found nothing," Gideon said. "Turn around and ride out Dutch. I'm giving you one chance." Kincaid laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "There's 3 of us in here, Holt, and 4 more outside. You might be the Grim Reaper himself, but you can't shoot all of us." "I don't have to," Gideon said. "Just you." Bang! The Winchester flashed. Gideon didn't wait for Kincaid to move. He fired from the hip. The bullet caught Kincaid in the shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to drop the lantern. The lantern shattered. Oil splashed across the dry floorboards. Flames whooshed up instantly, igniting the rotten wood. "Kill him!" Kincaid screamed, clutching his shoulder. The room erupted in gunfire. Gideon dove to the left, rolling behind the overturned table as bullets chewed up the wood where he had been standing. He racked the lever of his rifle, firing 2 shots back. One of Kincaid's men grunted and fell. Under the floor, Eliza screamed silently. The heat was rising instantly. The fire was spreading fast. "Smoke him out!" Kincaid yelled, retreating out the door. "Burn it down!" Gideon was pinned. Bullets were flying through the walls, splintering the timber. The fire was licking at the ceiling. He looked toward the corner where the hatch was. "Eliza!" he roared over the noise of the gunfire. "Get out! Now!" The floorboards near the stove were already smoking. Eliza pushed the hatch up. The room was full of smoke. She coughed, clutching Leo, who was now screaming. "The window!" Gideon shouted, firing blindly at the door to keep the bandits back. "Go out the back window!" Eliza scrambled over the debris. The heat was searing. She reached the back window, but the shutter was jammed. She pushed, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck!" she cried. Gideon abandoned his cover. He sprinted across the room, tackling Eliza just as a shotgun blast blew a hole in the wall where she had been standing. He covered her body with his, shielding her from the splinters and the heat. He stood up, grabbing the heavy iron stove with a roar of effort, and hurled it through the back wall. The rotten wood gave way, creating a jagged opening. "Go!" He shoved her through. Eliza tumbled out into the cool night air, landing hard in the dirt. She scrambled up, checking Leo. He was crying but unhurt. Gideon rolled out after her. "Run for the rocks, go!" They sprinted toward the rocky outcrop behind the shack. Bullets kicked up dust around their feet. They dove behind a large boulder, just as the shack was fully engulfed in flames, illuminating the night like a bonfire from hell. "You hit!" Gideon gasped, checking his ammo. "No," Eliza panted. "You grazed my ribs." Gideon grimaced, touching his side. His hand came away bloody. "Nothing deep. We're trapped," Eliza said, looking around. The bandits were circling the fire, whooping and hollering. They had them pinned against the cliff face. "Not yet," Gideon said. He looked at her, his eyes intense in the firelight. "Can you shoot?" Eliza looked at the heavy pistol on his hip. She thought of the auction block. She thought of Miller. She thought of the snake. "I can learn," she said. Gideon pulled his Colt Peacemaker from his holster and pressed it into her hand. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of death. "Point and pull," Gideon said. "Don't close your eyes this time, Eliza. Watch the front. I'll take the high ground." He began to climb the rocks, moving to flank them. Eliza was left alone behind the boulder, the gun shaking in her hands, the fire roaring in front of her, and 7 men coming to kill them. She cocked the hammer. Click. The sound was small, but it felt like the loudest thing in the world. She wasn't a widow anymore. She wasn't livestock. She was a mother with a gun. "Come on," she whispered, narrowing her eyes as a shadow moved through the smoke. "Come and get it." The fire from the burning shack turned the night into a grotesque amphitheater of dancing orange light and deep shadows. Eliza pressed her back against the cold granite of the boulder, the heavy Colt peacemaker shaking in her grip. Leo was whimpering against her chest, a small bundle of terror amid the chaos. "Come out, little lady," a voice jeered from the smoke. It was one of Dutch's men, emboldened by the flames. "Dutch just wants to ask you where the gold is hidden before we burn the rest of this place down." A figure emerged from the haze, silhouetted against the inferno, creeping toward her position. He held a rifle low, scanning the rocks. Eliza's breath hitched. She remembered Gideon's words at the auction block. She owns herself now. She remembered the snake, headless in the dust. She looked down at her son, his tiny hand clutching her dress. She wasn't prey anymore. She raised the heavy pistol using both hands to steady it, just as Gideon had shown her. She didn't close her eyes. She lined up the sight on the center of the approaching shadow. Point and pull. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil was brutal, snapping her wrists back and deafening her ears. The blast momentarily blinded her. When her vision cleared, the shadow was gone. A man lay face down in the dirt 10 yards away, not moving. A stunned silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the roar of the fire. The remaining bandits hadn't expected the rabbit to bite back. From high above on the ridge, a Winchester cracked the 3 times in rapid succession. Crack, crack, crack. 3 screams echoed in the canyon. Gideon, from his perch in the rocks, had used the distraction of Eliza's shot to paint the targets. "Halt, you son of a bitch!" Dutch Kincaid screamed from somewhere behind the burning barn. His voice was ragged with pain. "Come down here and fight like a man." "I'm fighting like a man who wants to live, Dutch." Gideon's voice echoed down from the darkness. "Which is why you're losing." Another shot rang out from the ridge, kicking up dirt near the barn. Dutch broke cover, panicking, trying to make a run for the creek bed where their horses were tied. He was limping heavily, blood dark on the shoulder of his duster. He was running right past Eliza's hiding spot. He saw her at the last second. His eyes went wide with rage and desperation. He swung his sawed-off shotgun toward her. Eliza didn't have time to think. She didn't have time to aim. She just reacted. She fired the second shot from the peacemaker wildly. The bullet missed Dutch, sparking off a rock near his feet. But it made him flinch. His shotgun blast went wide, peppering the boulder above Eliza's head with lead shot. Before he could rack another shell, a final shot from above ended it. Dutch Kincaid jerked violently, a neat blue hole appearing in the center of his forehead. He collapsed backward into the dust, staring up at the smoke-filled sky with empty eyes. Silence returned to the basin heavier than before. The fire in the shack was beginning to die down, having consumed everything it could. Eliza sat frozen, the smoking gun still pointed at where Dutch had fallen. She was shaking uncontrollably. She had just killed a man, and she had helped kill others. The reality of it crashed down on her, making her nauseous. Bootsteps crunched on the rocks. She jerked the gun up, panic flaring again. "Easy, Eliza. It's me." Gideon stepped into the dying light. He looked like a demon risen from the earth. His face was smeared with soot and sweat, his duster torn. He was holding his side, and blood was seeping between his fingers. He looked at the dead man near her, then at Dutch's body, and finally at the smoking gun in her hand. A strange expression crossed his hard face, something like respect mixed with a deep sadness. "You did good," he said, his voice rough. Eliza dropped the gun as if it were red hot. She grabbed Leo, burying her face in his neck, sobbing dry, hitching tears. Gideon holstered his rifle and limped over to the burning wreckage of the shack. He stood there for a long time, watching the last of Thomas Brooks's legacy turn to ash. "It was all for nothing," Eliza whispered, walking up behind him, still clutching Leo. They died for nothing. Thomas lied. There was never any treasure. Gideon kicked at a charred timber. Sparks flew upward. Thomas's greatest treasure was his ability to make men believe his lies. He got Dutch killed. He got himself killed. And he almost got us killed. He turned to look at her. The anger from before the fight was gone, burned away by the adrenaline and the blood. What was left was just exhaustion and a terrible clarity. "The locket," Gideon said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me on the trail?" "I was afraid," Eliza said, meeting his gaze steadily for the first time. "I was afraid you'd leave us to die in the desert. I was afraid you were just another man, like Miller or Rook, using me for something." Gideon nodded slowly. "I suppose I earned that." He winced, pressing harder on his bleeding side. "You need a doctor," Eliza said, stepping toward him. "Tucson is 3 days' ride. I won't make it bleeding like this." He sat down heavily on a flat rock near the fire. His face was paling beneath the soot. Eliza handed Leo to Gideon. He took the baby, instinctively cradling him gently, even as he bled. Eliza went to the dead body of one of Dutch's men. She fought the urge to be sick as she rifled through his saddlebags. She found a relatively clean shirt and a flask of whiskey. She returned to Gideon. "This is going to hurt." She poured the whiskey over the graze on his ribs. Gideon hissed through clenched teeth, his grip tightening on the baby. But he didn't cry out. Eliza used her own petticoat, tearing strips, to bind the wound tightly. They sat in silence for a long time as the dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold. The basin, so terrifying in the night, looked almost peaceful in the morning light. "What now?" Eliza asked. They had no shelter, little water. Gideon was wounded. They were miles from nowhere. Gideon looked down at Leo, who was awake now, staring up at the scarred man with wide, curious eyes. Gideon touched the baby's cheek with a calloused finger, a tenderness there that belied the violence of the night. "We ride to Tucson," Gideon said. "I'll collect the bounty on Dutch and his boys. It should be enough to get you that train ticket east." Eliza looked at the sunrise. She looked at the man who had bought her, threatened her, and saved her life 3 times over. She thought of the woman she was yesterday, scared, desperate. And the woman she was now, a woman who could shoot to kill to protect her own. The East sounded soft. It sounded like a place for someone she used to be. "No," Eliza said. Gideon looked up, surprised. "No. I'm not going east. There's nothing for me there." She looked at the vast, brutal landscape. "Thomas brought me west with lies, but I'm here now. I own myself." "Then what will you do?" Eliza reached out and took Leo back, holding him tight. She looked at Gideon, seeing past the scars and the guns, seeing the man beneath. "You said you paid $550 for us," Eliza said. "That's a lot of debt to work off." Gideon held her gaze. The early morning sun caught his eyes, turning the steel grey into something warmer. "I reckon it is. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Holt. I can cook, I can clean, and apparently I can shoot." Gideon slowly smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen on his face. It changed him completely, making him look 10 years younger, making the scar seem less jagged. "It's Gideon, Eliza, just Gideon." He stood up, wincing slightly, and looked toward where the big black stallion was waiting patiently. "Well then, partner, let's go find some water. We've got a long ride ahead of us." They mounted the horse together, the sun warming their backs, riding away from the ashes of the past, and toward a horizon that was terrifying, dangerous, and completely free. That is the story of Eliza Brooks and Gideon Holt. A tale forged in the brutal heat of the Arizona Territory, where life was cheap, but freedom was priceless. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who save us aren't knights in shining armor, but scarred souls just looking for redemption. And sometimes the damsel in distress learns to carry her own gun. If this gritty tale of Wild West survival and unexpected romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please slam that like button. It really helps get these stories out there. Share this video with anyone who loves a good Western drama with real stakes. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story from the frontier. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next trail.